In this episode, we'll be making a DIY project with a pre-made melt and pour soap. Sometimes new soap makers often ask the very common question, how do I make soap, especially if you have a project that you want to get started with your kids, without incorporating lye into the project? This is an especially common question when one doesn't really want to have household chemicals kicking around, or they're thinking about creating a soap making project with their children. Well, the short answer is you can use melt and pour soap. But of course, the more complete answer is there's already lye used in the making of this soap. The soap, in fact, has already been made, and so you don't need to start from scratch, as you see in our cold and hot processes that we make when we're adding the oils and the lyes together. And in today's project, we are going to create cherry blossom trees in our clear melt and pour soap. This project starts by chopping up 1-inch size cubes from 2.5 pounds of clear melt and pour. Now we'll be processing this in a 3-pound loaf mold and slicing it into 11 pieces. So in order to fill that mold, we're using a total of 2.5 pounds of clear soap. If you want the exact proportions, you can get a list of the complete instructions for this project at the link below this video. It is posted in the members section of the recipe directory listed in the melt and pour category. Now this project is a little bit different if you're used to making cold process and layering your design. We're going to be making our embeds as we go along and pouring our layers in each step. I'm going to be using black cherry. These are cherry blossom trees we're making today. So the black cherry fragrance oil will go into all parts of the soap regardless of what color we're creating. In this step, I'm going to start setting up some of the embeds that we'll be using for our design. We'll start with the brown, which will end up being our tree trunks. Now, we're going to be far more hands-on and creative with this melt and pour. We're not exactly pouring these into a mold. We're going to hand sculpt these tree trunks as we go along. In order to get this set up into a consistency that I can work with, I'm just going to pour the entire amount of brown soap into a dish that's been lined with wax, and that's just so I can remove it out of the dish easily and we're not messing up any of our dishes. I want to set this aside and let that cool, but we'll go ahead and move on to the next stage. Our cherry blossoms are going to take up a big section of the design, so we need to use a lot of soap and make them nice, beautiful, bright cherry blossom pink. So I'm going to melt down about half of the soap, and then we're going to blend this down with a beautiful cherry blossom color. We're going to do the same thing where once this is completely blended down, I'm just going to pour it into a mold or a dish, something that I can remove very easily without making a mess, and we're just going to let that set up just enough to look like this. Now you can see here with this brown, it's stiff enough to work with, almost like a soap dough, not quite, it's still a little bit softer than that, but I can cut it smooth just like butter, and I can start molding the embeds that we're going to be making. Now I've literally just peeled the brown soap out of the wax paper that you saw me set it in, and I want to start making our tree trunks, which are going to be about 1 inch by 3 inches. And the most important thing in this project is to make it so that it does not look natural. We want these tree trunks to be a very sort of gnarled, knotty, old, wise old tree. I need to make 11 of these. They should be completely uneven, very different, and none of them should look the same. And I think here I'm about halfway there. I really don't want these to look sliced like we've sliced them with a knife. And with the melt and pour soap at this soft buttery stage, it's really difficult to not just get a cut in there and have it an absolutely perfect smooth cut. So we're trying to do the opposite of that by getting these to be all amorphous and completely flowing and natural. I want them twisted, I want them bent, I want them a little bit crooked, and we'll just keep playing with them until I get them exactly the way we want them. Once I think I'm happy with these, we're going to move these over to a clean sheet of wax paper, and we're going to let these firm up a little bit more, and then I will just continue to play with them just till I think that I get the shapes exactly how I like them and that they'll firm up in exactly that same position. And then once we're done with this and I'm finished fiddling with them, we're going to move on to the next stage, which will be something to stand our trees in. This landscape image will have a grassy floor for the trees to be nested in. So once we're ready with this, we're going to go into the next stage, melt down another section of melt and pour soap, and we're going to color this one green, and this one will just get poured directly into the bottom of our mold. Do you have a melt and pour design that you would love to share with us? Now remember, you can post your soapwork art directly on our Thermal Mermaid dashboard. Everyone can post their soap craft in the crafters community. You don't have to be a paid member to participate. You can register in the Thermal Mermaid Crafters community for free and have all the community features that the paid members have. That means everyone can interact with each other and browse the group topics and share their work. Now, if you have a great melt and pour design that you want to share with the soaping community, I will add your pictures to my next melt and pour video and link back to either your YouTube channel or your store, depending on what it is that you'd like to draw people's attention to, so that you can share your soap or your inspiration and designs to others who come here just to see that thing. All you need to do is log into the dashboard, scroll down, and share your work with us. And here we have our green, grassy, hilly floor base placed at the bottom of the mold. Now, one little trick when we're adding our embeds, anyone who's ever done melt and pour before knows that this stuff can get to boiling temperatures. It's extremely hot. And if you're trying to add an already cooled embed into a boiling hot melt and pour, well, what's likely to happen is that whatever your embed design and shape is easily able to just wisp away and melt right down into the hot boiling soap. So it's important that when you're going to try to put these embeds into any kind of a wet melt and pour, you want to try to keep the hottest part of the soap at about 180 degrees or below that if you can. The top of that soap is already starting to firm up, and that's helpful to me as the temperature is becoming more cool, then the soap is becoming firm, so I can kind of stick those tree roots in there and they'll stand for me. I need that temperature to come down, and the soap is starting to firm, but it also needs to be still loose enough so I can get those pieces in there. But just keep in mind, if you're working with anything too hot, the whole project will just melt apart right in front of your eyes. Remember a few minutes ago when we made a block of that pink soap? Well, now it's time to pull it out of its mold. You can see here that it's still very soft. We're cutting this just like butter. It's warm to the touch. It hasn't firmed up too much. And I want to dice this into thousands and thousands of tiny little pieces of different shapes and different textures. I'll start off by just making little squares. Now these of course are our cherry blossoms, and I want this entire block to be completely cut up. So we'll start off by making these little squares, and as we go along I'll even pull out the potato peeler and shave nice light wispy leafy pieces, and we'll just keep chopping and cutting and chopping and cutting. So I have two real primary different textures in here. I have these little chunks, which will be more of the inside part of the tree, and then I have these nice little wispy leaves. This will be sort of the top and the bottom and the floating part of the tree, so you can actually see the leaves in there. Not super important that you do this, but it does help bringing out that texture in the design of your treetops. Now the rest of this project takes about 5 minutes to complete. Once I'm satisfied with the size of the little leaves that we have, we're going to start by pouring in the rest of the soap, which is just a clear melt and pour base with a little fragrance oil put in there. Now you can see here that I'm pouring this on top of the green layer that has been set up for about 5 or 6 minutes. It's still warm enough for this to adhere, but if you've let yours sit for too long and the bottom has become too firm and you think that those pieces won't stick together, one thing that you can do is to take a fork or to take maybe some chopsticks, something with a sharp point, and stick holes into that green layer. And then that way, as you're pouring it down, it won't be super noticeable because this is just a clear layer. As you stick those little holes in there, you'll get a grab on that second layer. It doesn't work with all projects, but when you're working with clears like this or very, very specific colors that are defined from each other, you can use that technique just to make sure that your melt and pour sticks together. Now I'm going to start off by just sprinkling a few of these nice wispy little leaves down at the bottom. And these are more of the leaves that are falling toward the ground in the moment. We want to be able to see those, so we don't want to just throw all of our leaves into the top. We want most of the leaves concentrated at the top of the mold, and these little wispy ones are going to be just laying on the bottom. This also gives you an idea of if you're working with the correct temperature. Again, you have to wait until the clear has dropped down to 180 degrees or below that so that you're working with a lower temperature so your leaves won't melt in there as soon as you put them in. But if they do start to, you just drop a few in so that you can see that and you can give yourself just a few more minutes to wait. As you can see, I'm going to start making the pink part a little bit more dense. And as I go up, I'm still going to keep covering it ever so lightly with the clear so that it's going to keep those pieces of pink suspended and that it's not just all piling on top of each other. And every maybe half an inch or so, I'm just going to layer another layer of clear on top until we've got all of the tops of the trees completely filled in. Once we've completed setting all the pieces up, we're going to pour just the last bit of clear over the top to seal everything in, and then we'll set this aside to firm up. Now this can take anywhere from 6 hours to about 20 hours to firm up. You don't want to let this sit and get too hard, and you definitely cannot try to put this through with your loaf cutter because the melt and pour soap is not the same as cutting your cold process soap. So you have to make sure to use a knife with this so you don't ruin the strings on your loaf cutter. Now once the mold is finished, here is a side view of what it looks like when it comes out of the mold. This loaf hardened up in about 12 hours for me to where I wanted to cut it, and it had a good texture to where it wasn't wet on the inside and it also wasn't too hard to slice through because these bars are pretty darn dense, and if you wait too long then you could put a lot of effort into getting through, and you end up getting a more straight slice with your knife if you do it while it's still nice and soft. So that's just a little bit of an extra tip there. Now, as I've sliced these up, I did quickly realize that the camera doesn't catch how pretty these are when I show you the end result as soon as they're cut, because there is a glare and they need to be cleaned up just a little bit so you can get that beautiful view. But here's a good example of how you just have this shine and glare over that slick sheen. So what I'll do is I'll show you just a couple of them, and then I will clean them up and show you the photography, which allows for me to control that light a little better so you can see exactly what these look like after they've been the surfaces have been washed up and they've been allowed to dry, so you don't get that reflection. And then here we go. Here is the end result of our beautiful cherry blossom trees.